Hi everyone, welcome to this new type of video series. It's going to be 5 to 6 video series on how to delete the egoic mind, how you can dissolve the egoic mind for yourself, how you can start putting the changes into place. So this is the first video. This is an introduction video, and in this video I'm just going to explain what to expect in the course and understanding the ego a little bit more, and think about some questions you can start answering for yourself. Okay, so first of all, what to expect in the course. You can expect in this course what the ego is, the process of the ego, the detail that goes behind the process of the ego, how the ego is formed. That's really important, because if you don't know how the ego works, how it's formed, it might be a bit more difficult to see that in your life, so you can start putting that into place, the changes into place. The other thing we're going to be covering is trauma. So how the ego is related to trauma, how that's formed, and how the ego gets fed in your life, and how you can start seeing the feeding of the ego in your life. And that actually tells you how much power you have to change this. And this is actually the reason why I'm doing this course, because I've seen in my own life, in the work that I do, that we have got so much power. You have the power to change how you see things, how you look at things, how you start perceiving things, and therefore how you can start programming yourself to do things differently in your life. And that really means the ego. The ego is a thing that has got in the way of our growth, right? It has got in the way of our alignment. So it's so important that we start putting the changes into place, thinking about your life and where you are and where you want to be. The other thing we're going to cover is actually the process of how to start putting this into place. So there is a process to this, and it does take practice, but it is actually really simple, and you can start putting that in place as soon as possible once we've done this course, of course. So it is a thing, it is something that you can change, and as you go further along this video, I'm going to explain some actual techniques that you can start using so you can start putting the changes into place. So first of all, we need to understand, just briefly, a bit of an outline, what is the ego? The best way of seeing the ego is this. The ego acts as a survival mechanism. The ego acts as a protective mechanism for you. The ego is needed, right? There are two types of egos, and this is what we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering the second type of ego. The first type of ego is the ego that's there for survival all the time. It's got you when you're in a survival situation. It comes in and it protects you, right? That ego doesn't go away. It's needed, right? So if you think about if you're ever in the woods and there's a wild animal coming at you, that ego comes for you to help you. That acts as a protective mechanism. So that ego comes in and helps you to decide in that moment, are you going to run? Are you going to hide? Are you going to fight the animal? Are you going to go up the tree? What are you going to do? That ego is needed. We're not going to be talking about that ego because it's there. It doesn't need to be covered because it's always going to be there. No issues, right? Thank God we've got that. We're going to be covering the second ego, which is how the ego gets split. The second ego is the ego that continues in our life, and it's the ego that basically blocks us and keeps us in fear and survival. This is the ego that's getting in the way of your growth. This is the ego that we're going to be talking about. So, really important that we understand that the ego acts as a protective mechanism, because there's a compassion there that we can allow it to have to some extent, right? We can give some compassion for ourselves because it is trying to protect us all the time. It really is. But it's also really important to know that the ego only knows fear and survival. I'm going to say that again. The ego only knows fear and survival. It doesn't know anything else. It doesn't know truth whatsoever. It doesn't know about your alignment. It's just there to try and protect you, and therefore it plays its role and comes in when it believes that you are in fear and survival. Now, if I'm looking down, it's just because I'm just checking that I've covered everything here. So the other thing to know is that the ego is actually separate from us. It's not actually in us. It's separate from us, but it comes in when it believes that it's needed. Remember, it only knows fear and survival, and it doesn't know truth. It has no idea what truth is. And this is how we're going to be covering the detail of how to change things in your life as we go through the course, and you'll find out more about that. So, what I want you to consider in your life, and I want you to kind of answer this for yourself first, is how does the ego play out in your life? How can you see the ego in your life? How does the ego play out in your life? Remember, the ego is fear. It's a fear and survival. It comes in as some kind of block, some kind of barrier, some kind of stopping you from your alignment. It is stopping you from moving forward for your higher self. That is what the ego is doing. So how can you see that in your life? For example, the ego may be seen as believing you're unworthy, not enough, right? Anything that you feel like is stopping you from moving forward in your life. So think about maybe your dream life, right? Are you letting yourself get in the way of your dream life and moving forward in any way? That's going to be the ego playing out. The ego is also, it could be thinking too much. That's also a way of getting in the way. When you're thinking too much, thinking of the past, thinking too much of the future, that's your ego getting in the way as well, right? So how does the ego play out in your life? So have a think about that. And then what I want you to think about are these series of questions. We're going to go a little bit deeper. Ask yourself these questions. What are my blocks and fears? What do I notice? What is getting in the way of my alignment? How do I see myself and how do I see the world? What is getting in the way of me moving forward? What are my fears? What are my egoic desires? The last one's really interesting because the ego, which is the egoic mind, is different from our soul and our heart desire. So what the ego wants is quite different to the soul and the heart. So what are your egoic desires? Everyone's probably got some kind of egoic desires, right? That can help you as well understand how the ego may be playing out in your life. So the next part to this video series is the covering of trauma. So how the ego is formed, how trauma is related to this. And then as you go further along, we're going to learn more about the process, the details. It's really important, again, about learning the details of how the ego is created and how it's going to look like in your life so you can start seeing that for yourself. And then the last parts of this video series is basically how you can start putting this into practice, how to make the changes in your life, how you can start putting some techniques that you're going to be learning in this course. And yeah, I hope you enjoy.